Good morning, traders, and a happy Tuesday out there to everyone. Hope that y'all had a nice evening last night and are all ready for this nice day in front of us here. Just before we go hopping into these charts here, just good to be aware of on the economic calendar side of things. We do have really just for the Canadian dollar there, the CAD, they'll have their CPI figure due out at 8:30 Eastern there, so that will likely be fairly substantial there for that Canadian dollar. But outside of that, we are light in the morning session as far as any U.S. Data points are concerned. We have existing home sales at the top of those first 30 minutes at 10 o'clock Eastern. And then lastly, FOMC meeting minutes there at 2 o'clock Eastern there in the afternoon session. So that'll be good to be aware of as well. But once again, CPI 8:30 for Canada, 10 o'clock existing home sales for the US, and then FOMC meeting minutes there at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So with that said, we'll want to come over here and blow up our daily chart since we had some nice progress during yesterday's trading. Our bit of a range expansion bar up out of the 3-bar balance mode. So we had come in and tested up to 45.71 during yesterday's trading. So what that ended up being was just a brief, poke above or look above the 45.66, the high data point there from the trading done on September 15th. So we looked above it briefly. What we haven't seen during the overnight session was the Globex range was 45.67, so we kept it inside of the previous day's range. No test of that PD high as of yet, so we'll want to keep that on the sheets there, 45.71, just since that is the previous day's high. Outside of that, we've also been working. It hasn't quite formed as of yet, but we've had our 3, 6, yesterday was 7 closes on one side of the 5 SMA. So the value of the 5 SMA should still be of good value for us there today. Just as far as monitoring whether or not we close above it, that comes in at 45.36 here on the daily bars. So if I blow this up just a notch, we can see that it comes into sight lower end of yesterday's daily bar range. So for now, keeping it nice and tame in the overnight session, and that's kind of more or less where we are standing here on the daily bars. Came up previous congestion zone, look above the one singular spike high data point, and then just proceeding to do some consolidation during the overnight session. Nothing too much to fault here as far as the dailies go. And then as we come down to the intraday data, whether looking at 120 minute of display or the hourly charts, all it's doing is simple consolidation, no real major sell divergences or anything like that taking place. We know that even during yesterday, we did a fairly nice job of maintaining and holding ourselves well above all of the low developed areas that we had from down below from our original range expansion. Still doing a nice job of keeping things maintained and coming into the session, essentially just maintaining and doing some trading around the hourly moving average here. So here with the ES, we'll keep a watch. What we can also do is just include one additional data point here from our previous reaction highs, since that was a nice little standout, and that would come in fairly close towards where that 5 SMA comes in the site, 45.41 and a quarter, whereas the 5 SMA comes in at 45.36. So for now, not much to fault. We're just coming in with a bit of a consolidation on this hourly chart without doing too much damage. So we'll keep a watch there, see how we handle ourselves off of the opening. But for now, just have an inside range bar with respect to yesterday's trading. And then as we proceed to move on along here, we'll have some other interesting ones to consider, including that of the DAX. The DAX has also, to a stronger degree, been working with consecutive closes on one side of the 5 SMA, so we have the extended run well intact for the DAX. We even came in yesterday and put in a slightly higher high on the daily bars, so continued on its journey there, but like we were saying yesterday on the close, we did leave a bit of a tail there on that DAX, so we have a tail in that previous day's low. Comes in fairly close. 15,921 there is where the 5 SMA comes in there for the case of the DAX. And interestingly, this is a nice case where we could see that 240-minute EMA lining up for the most part with the 5 SMA on the daily chart. So if we come over here and look at the oscillator configuration here in the DAX, can see we've been making our progress to the upside, slightly lower highs in the oscillator and some corrective action on the 240-minute slow line, but essentially not giving up too much ground there in this DAX. But would be keeping a watch whether you're looking at the 240 or the 120-minute time frame, just to see how we continue to consolidate, perhaps get a little closer towards that 5 SMA and that 240 EMA. So those will be some nice areas there for the DAX to take into consideration. But for now, still on the extended run. Also has an inside range bar, just like our S&Ps from the overnight session. And then moving on along outside of our index future category, we have that of the euro currency, still doing a fairly good job of also keeping itself maintained from the impulse bar that we had from last week's trading. Fairly constructive in the EC. We were able to look above the previous day's high in the overnight session. And really in the big picture here on the dailies, what we're really dealing with is coming back up, trading inside of these 2 days that we had from the 30th and 31st respectively from the very end of September there. So as we come up, also just to note, sometimes they have some play around the big round figures. So we have 1.1 even that looms above there in the case of the euro currency. But speaking a little bit more so on the daily bars, on the intraday charts, what I have marked off here is just from the overnight high, 1.09765 for the EC. So just really a very mild early morning pullback, and we'll see as to how it wants to trade at and around that overnight high. We do have a piece of Canadian data, so that could shake up things a notch there for the currencies, but between that 1.1, that is up a little bit further up above in that previous day's high for the euro currency, which was coming in at 1.09645. Should be some nice zones of interest. We're just slightly above the previous day's high there in the EC for the time being there. And getting that one out, then we have the gold. The gold had formed itself a 3-bar balance mode on the close yesterday. Just in other words, that yesterday's high was below the 2-day high and the yesterday's low above the 2-day low. So in the case of the GC here, working on some early morning, movement off the 8 a.m. reading, some mild expansion off of the 3-bar balance mode from yesterday's action. And what we can see here in the gold, for one, we're coming up here to give a test of the 2-day high, the 1996.4. trading 1997. So just briefly looking above the top of this 3-day consolidation period, which is perfectly fine. Not too bad of a look there for the gold. So we'll see if that wants to continue and maintain. You have 2000 there as the big round number that looms further up above in the case of the GC. And if we come over here just to the intraday charts, you can see just have this little area marked off just as being a zone that we had previous little swing high, bit of the round number, but also where we had been trading before, starting to pick up some better steam to the downside in the case of the gold. So moving outside of our 3 days of balance there, and we'll see as to how far they want to reach. For now, we can give them some credit for having looked above the 2-day high there of 1996. And we'll see if they keep it maintained, and perhaps if they want to have any type of play around the big round figure of 2000 even there on the gold. So we'll keep a watch on that one there. Then we have the crude and the bonds here to wrap things up before getting into our little Canada figure there. And with the crude, we know we had 2 days of strong, low to high, after yesterday's trading. So they've come a long way. We talked about the sharp down and then essentially sharp back up, filling in all of the blanks. And here with the crude, what's kind of interesting, or what we can take into account, is the rhythm here on the 120-minute oscillator. So we came up off the lows in more of a 2-par wave, kind of that A, B, C type of feeling. But we could see we kind of worked off this feeling of a little loss of momentum on the 120-minute oscillator. So we've coming in corrected already here to the 120-minute moving average. So keeping things fairly maintained, and we'll see on the crude. For myself, since we did carry the ball, we talked about the feeling of a bit of the wide range reversal there after yesterday's bar, taking out the high from that big selling bar we had on the 16th. So shifting some of the downside momentum, but we've also had a lot of that sharp down and sharp up. So wouldn't be too uncommon for the crude to perhaps fill out some range, digest some of the progress we made from yesterday. And we could see these little windows here on this 120-minute display, 77.98 up to 78.56. Just a little previous congestion zone. We certainly traded up towards that zone yesterday and then proceeded to revert back towards the mean. So between this 78 even mark essentially and even 76 even there, it gives the crude a little bit of room to roam there. So if it does want to do some digesting, we'll keep a watch and see if that would be the case there as far as the crude goes. No major numbers or anything for it there today. And then lastly here we have the bonds. The bonds of, trying to slowly escape themselves from the prolonged price bar overlap that we've been having. We know about the 115.12, which we had been doing a lot of trading around during last week. So in the case of the bonds, we also had kind of like the gold, the 3-bar balance mode in the bonds, because yesterday's bar did not take out the 2-day high nor the 2-day low, so we formed ourselves some 3-bar balance action. Overnight, we did proceed to probe a bit higher. We traded up to 116.14 in the bond, so have that overnight high marked off here on the 120-minute display. And what we can also note, no pun intended, is that on these 10-year notes, a little more lackluster on their progress here. They have not been able to take out that same spike high there that we had from, I guess this would have been from last week, right? So the bonds, on the other hand, did an okay job of looking on the other side of it, and these 10s just not quite confirming with that of the 30 years so far there. So 30s, moving outside the range, whereas these 10s still keeping it a bit on the contained side. And just one last little thing to point out before we head into this morning data point. It's a little bit of a ways down there, but just to kind of put it out there for those who keep a closer tabs on the fixed income side of things here, is that on these 30 years, I'll blow up the daily charts for one. Right where we're trading in between, we did fill in most of this gap that we had from the 22nd to the 25th of September beneath the 4.6 mark. We do have one that looms a little further down below, but we're leaving that untested. So here's the yields on the intraday chart. You can see this one singular little gap that we had, gap data point. So trading inside of that hadn't really gone down for perhaps a complete fill, but just kind of good to note between that 4.6 and 4.5% mark, some nice thresholds there in those 30 years to be aware of. And then if we consider these 10s, if they get outside of that little tail, they as well, we're opening, inside of this area, but check it out. This is our other gap that we've been working with in the 10-year notes. This is from the trading done on the 20th up to basically the 21st, 4.404, 4.365. No trading has been done there, and that's essentially where we are opening here in the session today. So we have a little bit of a black space or a gap zone to bear in mind there in the case of those fixed income, and that particular one is there in the 10-year notes. So further away there in the case of those 30-year bond futures. So with all of that said, let's get these charts back up in order here and see just as to how we handle. Once again, this is just a Canadian data point, so probably it's not going to be as pertinent here for the U.S. markets, but we'll still want to let that run its course there and see how we handle these early morning gyrations. But we'll get these all nice and adjusted for ourselves and see how this all starts to pan out here shortly.